Well, joining me now is somebody who's going to become a candidate for the eventual ToddCast Hall of Fame of guests, because he now joins Mark Zandi and Jake Sherman in this iteration of becoming a repeat guest of the Chuck ToddCast. He's actually a three-time. I don't know how we're going to, it's like, do you count laugh-in appearances with your SNL appearances back in the day? But many of you, Bruce is just one of my favorite smart people to talk to, pure and simple. He's sort of a Washington smart guy, works in Washington, the business of Washington. Yes, that means representing corporate interests sometimes, dealing with Congress. I think there was a time he had a political party. I don't know if he does anymore, but it doesn't matter whether he does or not. His analysis is always database. His Substack, he took what we've loved, his quarterly reports, he's turned it into a weekly Substack. You get Sunday morning charts from him. He's just, it's just good every once in a while to have a smart guy on this podcast, right? We don't have enough of them.
I am honored to be your Martin Short, Chuck.
Well, there you go. I think it was it Martin Short. You're right. I mean, Martin Short, by the way, he's one of those comedian. Everybody in the business like holds him up higher than everybody else, even though the public doesn't always, for whatever reason.
Well, I was just going for the frequency of guests, figuring I don't deserve to call myself Steve Martin, but yeah, that's what I was going for.
Yeah, that's it. Well, welcome. Good to see you.
Great to see you as well. I love the sort of the Chuck Todd Unchained. Now that you are an entrepreneurial, not tied to any particular media property that has to negotiate public spectrum licenses. You say what you want, you do what you want. It's, sort of like our mutual buddy Saliza. It is fun to see somebody who has been as successful at you going the traditional route, right, going totally off menu and just every night whipping up really cool, interesting recipes.
So here's the question I have for you, because I'd like to think that when I was at Cabletown, and the network that's owned by Cabletown, figure I might as well use a little 30 Rock reference there, is I never thought I was, what I would say is I never thought I was holding things back, but I might have rounded the edges in order to sort of keep the peace, right? You had to keep the peace sometimes internally, keep the peace with, if I got in a booking problem that could hurt the morning show or it could hurt an evening show, all sorts of issues. And yet, that description you just made, I both appreciate it, but it's also an indictment on traditional media right now. We're in a tough spot where, look, I know the individual journalists want to do more, and they do feel as if they're being held back. Not maybe sometimes it's even not specifically, it's just more the climate's holding them back. Why do you think so many of them are struggling to break out of it?
I think there are a couple of things going on. I mean, first, the internet broke politics and it broke media. And we are still in an era of trying to figure out what are the ways to operate, what are the rules, from in politics, how do you run primary elections, how do you draw district lines? But in media, the old model of advertising got demonetized. Mm-hmm. Then you concurrently have this technological tsunami where one of the reasons Walter Cronkite was the most trusted person in America in 1970 is there were only 3 networks. Right. So there was no competition. Nobody was beating him with a tweet to some weirdo fact. There weren't, Joe Rogan and splinter competition things.
You might add Dick Cavett and Tom Schneider, right? Like they were the closest thing we had to some cultural critics, at least on the television.
Yeah, but at 6:30 p.m., you and your family were watching one of 3 networks, right. And so the instinct for a network at that point is appeal to the whole nation, right, play it down the middle of the fairway, go slow and kind of enforce the norms. And subsequently, people who didn't want to watch news wanted to just watch sports. All right, we lost them to ESPN. And people who felt that either Fox was less biased or frankly more likely to affirm their beliefs went there. And the media used to inform us and we would accept a set of facts. And now we go where the facts are what we want them to be. And so I think if I look at you, you kind of came of greatness just at the time when the Cronkite-Russert opportunity was being foreclosed by a
Right.
combination of technology, of the internet, of the way politics were changing. Where I see the extraordinary opportunity now is in the Substack, is in the
Yeah.
podcasters, the people who are kind of building their own audiences, and the viewers like me and you who are putting together our own, the Bruce Daily News is,
Yeah.
Noah Smith and you and Derek
No, it's
Thompson,
true.
just all over
Right.
the place.
It's funny. I find the Substack feed. I had this conversation with Brad Todd. We're not related, but if you told me if we go back 7 or 8 generations, I think we both have the Scotch Irish, at least on my Todd side of things. He was talking about how, here he is a conservative, and he even admits, he goes, Substack feels like at times, quote unquote, leans left. But it's not a ideological lean, right? If anything, and if anything, though, it's a robust, healthy forum for debate. That Substack feed where people occasionally post their stuff and react. It's like a flashback to like the first 2 years of Twitter.
Yeah, you look, if you feel like your Substack is leaning left or right, it's because you've curated it to lean left or right.
Yeah.
When I do a lot of public speaking, I know you do too, and kind of towards the end, often people ask, well, what's your advice? And my two biggest
Yeah.
pieces of advice, one, this one is read history.
Yeah.
Because we all have this recency bias. It's never been this bad, but that's what they said in the 90s. They said that in the 70s. It's been really
we
bad.
do it all the, yeah.
But the other one is balance your media diet.
Always.
Take a look if you are only reading people you agree with and watching people you agree with, you're not doing it right.
Right.
Find people not who are shrill and horrible, but who you think maybe get it wrong, but boy, are they thought provoking. And occasionally they make you realize you get it wrong.
100%.
And that takes intentionality. It's just a lot easier to just turn on the network and it's all right. It's all left.
Right.
But I think that leads to a much less healthy democratic dialogue.
There's a reason results matter more than promises. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan has become America's largest injury law firm. For the last 35 years, they've recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. It includes cases where insurance companies offered next to nothing, short of shortchanging, seeing if they could get away with it. And Morgan & Morgan fought back, and they won millions. In Pennsylvania, one client was awarded $26 million. It was a staggering 40 times the amount that the insurance company originally offered. That offer, $650,000, whatever it took to sort of get away without paying. So with more than 1,000 lawyers across the country, Morgan & Morgan knows how to deliver for everyday people. So if you're injured, you're looking for a lawyer, check out forthepeople.com/ToddCast or dial pound law, pound 529 on your cell phone. And remember, all law firms are not the same. So give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their fee is free unless they win.
Well, I guess the reason it's funny you say that on the curation, because I've done that. I curate here's what I found fascinating with my different feeds is I did the same thing on Twitter. That Twitter feed feels very right leaning now. Now, I don't know it's whether people I followed on the left have just left, right? And they don't contribute. So my feed goes that way. And I feel like I have a fairly even feed in Substack, and it may be that the lefties just stack more, or what do we call it? Restacking, right? On that, or whatever it is. So, but it is interesting how I will just say there's a better intellectual conversation taking place in Substack than there is in other social media outlets.
Well, I think that's right. And look, let's be honest. I mean, Twitter got bought by Elon.
Right.
Who number one thing is to make sure that his own tweets are most visible and most seen. And at the end of the day, he paid for the microphone, so I guess he has the right to do that. That it's definitely gone very hard to the right. I do think some of it is the kind of left flight.
Yep.
But I think some of it is the algorithms prioritization schemes make it voices on the right, which if you go back 10 years were fewer and more likely to be, hard pressed to get through. And now the opposite is true.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Before I get into sort of where we are, and I've got a couple of ideas I want to throw at you, get your reaction to. But, look, you understand sort of the business of Washington. And, when you look at the last 6 months, and we've seen, I guess I find it remarkable how many titans of industry have decided to buy houses in DC. It's a start, right? Whether it's Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg, these guys. It is in the same way 20 years ago, it felt as if those rich guys needed a place in New York, a place in LA, and their place in Silicon Valley. Now Washington is a tentpole, right? For this. What has that meant for the business side of Washington? What has that meant for K Street? And are we in a situation now where success at a firm is not bipartisan clients?
Well, I'm not sure how many clients are bipartisan in terms of, one of my longest clients, one of my favorite clients is Walmart. They're not a partisan entity. We're a bipartisan firm.
They try really hard not to be, right?
Well, right.
I guess my better question was bipartisan firm. How hard is it to be a bipartisan firm these days in Washington? That used to be the killer. That was the goal of every successful lobbyist, was the minute, if it was somebody on the right, and I saw Brian Ballard do this a couple of years ago. He went and hired a bunch of Democrats. Like, I want to own it all just in case my side isn't in power. You saw the same thing with the Tony Podestas of the world on the left side of the aisle. He was like, I got to go find me some Republicans. I feel like it feels a tad outdated because of the way Trump operates, but I'm curious how you read the lay of the industry land here inside the business of DC.
Look, we're in year 22 of our firm. We have 11 Republicans and 11 Democrats. We've always been plus or minus one. Mm-hmm. It's intentional and design, and we're more effective because of it. Start with, as you know, the pendulum swings back and forth. Karl Rove didn't say permanent majority. He said durable majority in 2004. And 2 years later, the House and the Senate had already both gone the other direction. Obama had 60 Senate Democratic votes. They lost the House 2 years later. And by 2014, Republicans were controlling the Senate. So long term, if you don't want to feast and then famine and go back and forth, you want to be bipartisan is thought number one. Number two, it depends who you are as a firm and as people. I don't want ideologues at my shop. I want people. I mean, the Republicans and Democrats have as much in common with each other in terms of, some of us are parents of 3 kids and, with kids are empty nest. And we all like working together, with all due respect. I don't want ideologues. If you're that ideological, you're probably not going to be good in a consulting job because you won't like half your clients because of what they make or their views on climate one way or the other. We have I think the book was entitled The No Asshole Rule. We have a policy of hire nice people who like working with each other. The last thing I'd say, and I think you probably see this too, I bet sometimes you get some of your best Trump insights from your Democratic friends, and sometimes you get some of your best insights on what's happening among Democrats from Republicans. Mm-hmm. We definitely find that when we are offering Republican insights, we know these guys, we talk to these guys, but there's a groupthink. And every now and then, my favorite story ever is one of my old buddies. I know you know David Castagnetti too. He used to be, he was an early partner of mine. And we were in a meeting one day, and it was a killer room of really, former staff directors, chiefs of staff, the leadership. And Castagnetti says, I think Boehner's going to resign. And the whole room is all these Republican royalty. Like, what are you talking about, dude? And he's like, he's a Catholic guy. He just had the Pope. Like, it's no fun anymore for him. Mm-hmm. Literally in that meeting, everybody's back then, BlackBerry goes off. Boehner has announced he's retiring. I mean, it never happens. That would happen 10 minutes after.
Sounds like a movie.
And the only problem, Castagnetti failed to pull a Costanza. You need to, at that point, stand up, button your coat, turn around, and just leave. Just simply walk out. It's truly
that's it. I'm out.
Right. But because he was looking through a different lens, he had an insight that the rest of us missed. So I think our clients, right now there's leaning heavier on who knows the new teams, who can get in front of these guys. It is an RRR town, House, Senate, White House. Mm-hmm. But that never lasts forever. And so bipartisan, I think, remains both easy enough to operate. It's easier to be an R now than a D, but it's we stick together.
There was the so-called K Street project back in the day that was an attempt to try to, some would argue right-size K Street, that it had a left lean, certainly in the early aughts because of the Clinton years. You could have made that case. We see the purge taking place in other operations. Have you felt pressure in Trump world when it comes to that? And if not you, have you seen other uh, vendors in this space sort of not take a client or take a client in a way that tries to curry favor with Trump?
Well, I certainly think everyone is mindful of whatever you do publicly and how it may be received. I've seen that more, unlike in 2017 when there were no Trump firms or MAGA firms, he surprised the world. That's when Ballard moved up, wisely perceiving that.
Yeah, but Ballard was really just sort of a regional guy. He was a Tallahassee guy.
So that's changed radically. There's Ballard, there's Miller, there's Continental. There's a lot of Trump firms, and there are a lot of firms with Trump 1.0 or Trump fundraiser types. So what's really different this time is you have an entire set of sort of swamp creatures who are very much all Trump all the time. Now, Ballard took Harvard, so I don't see them necessarily looking away clients. What I hear from the market is, first, those guys are asking extraordinary prices, just crazy numbers, stuff that I would blush, and I like high numbers if I can get them, but numbers that are massively out of market. And their theory is they'll name check somebody.
They're selling access. That's basically what they're selling, right? Hey, we can get inside that West Wing. We'll get you a meeting with Susie
access
Wiles. We'll get you in there.
And a claim of knowledge. But as you see, I forget I forget the name of that new club where Besson just threatened to punch Pulte in the face.
Right. The near 1789, the restaurant, right? The
executive briefing or whatever it is, like $500,000 to join. That there is kind of a new, what I've seen in year one of Trump 2.0 is, there is now this whole group quick to say we are uniquely capable of getting folks in. They're charging huge amounts of rates. As judged by Harvard, I don't believe you hire these guys. I don't know anybody who hired them and somehow got an exemption from tariffs. There are no exemptions from tariffs. But given that right now the Republicans in Congress are so subservient to the president, they are so whatever, how high, Mr. President, I'm finding that those with long-standing, deep Hill relationships maybe have a little bit less that you can offer in the short term because they're not passing laws. They're declaring emergencies. They're putting out executive orders. They're doing tariffs. Right. We found when the One Big Beautiful bill came out, the big tax reconciliation, we were super busy, and a lot of the newer firms or a lot of the only Trump administration firms didn't have the experience, the knowledge, the reach, whatever, to be as effective. And I tend to think, again, the pendulum swings, that we were not going to be in a unitary executive 4-year Congress doesn't matter. It comes and it goes. But the first 6 months were pretty heavy duty out of the gate executive branch.
You brought up Miller in there, Jeff Miller, who in some ways, he was close to the former speaker, Kevin McCarthy.
Yep.
Does Mike Johnson, most speakers have sort of, former staffers that become players on K Street, and it's, there might be some people listening to this going, good God, is this how it works? Yes, this is exactly how it works, folks. Mike Johnson, does he have a K Street go-to yet? Is there people that sell themselves as, hey, we're the Mike Johnson firm?
Well, look, I'm sure there are folks who worked for Speaker Johnson in the past or even as speaker and have rolled out now back downtown. Mr. Miller did an effective job kind of transitioning over. There's not so much of a Johnson diaspora yet, just because he's kind of been newer and it's still in the Trump era. But look, at the end of the day, I think often people unfairly suggest somehow that's unique to lobbying. I mean, how many media guys do you know who go into PR firms? Why? No. Because they know how it works on the other side, because they've developed relationships of trust. They understand, hey, if you want to talk to Chuck Todd at NBC, like what are the things that resonate with him? How does he think? In the same way that lots of the regulator types end up going to law firms. It's, who flies your and my United Airlines flight to the West Coast? Probably an ex-Air Force pilot. Experience matters, and it does on K Street, just like it does in every other walk of life.
What you do well is trend spot And we've got some interesting trends that I want to dig into. Some of them actually, by the time this airs, I'll have put out a Substack, and the focus of my weekly Substack and mine this week is sort of on, it's picking up on yet again more global instability. We've seen what happened in Japan. We've seen what happened in France. And I guess I put it all back at Brexit, right? That Brexit was the shot heard around the world, that Brexit was the moment. And I'm curious if you agree with this statement as I've made it, and it's okay. I bring you on here to disagree smartly. Trust me.
No, you don't.
Well, smartly.
No, I'm kidding.
Which is, David Cameron probably made the most catastrophic era of a modern leader that didn't have to do with war in the last 50 years.
So I tend to see Brexit along with Trump as actually downstream. And to me, the upstream is the great financial collapse. And to me,
to you goes back to 2009.
I go back to that when all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, the elites, the experts, just like with the post 9/11 Iraq war. Okay, we thought they had figured it all out because the first Iraq war went pretty well for the United States, but it's not going so well this time. So we no longer have unlimited confidence in war and peace on those guys. Suddenly we have, we thought that the regulators were keeping an eye on things, but all of a sudden that we're nearly going to a Great Depression and we have to bail out Wall Street, but we're not taking care of people. That, to me, you saw populism kind of cut in both directions. You had the Occupy movement get born, and you had the Tea Party movement get born. Now, you and I know all of those are, you could argue, you could go back to Ross Perot and you could go to Pat Buchanan and Howard Dean. But to me, the global event in the 21st century that really began the major break in people's confidence with the rules and the parties and the systems, including leading to the populism that said, let's break up Brexit, was GFC.
Look, I think that's a compelling case. And what you're arguing then is, so Cameron didn't have to make the referendum, right? I mean, had he not done the referendum, then we just postponed the break, that the opportunity for the revolt would have come somewhere else.
100%. And whether it would have been technically as a Brexit or not, we're seeing populism, and we've been seeing populism for the last 15 years all around the world, rising. People don't trust the parties, the institutions, the establishment. They don't think that the institutional players have their back. They think the institutional players are self-dealing. Free markets, well, who's that help? Free trade, well, who's that help? I used to believe, and I still tend to believe, it ultimately helps more people, but the winner circles were getting smaller. Right. And if free trade benefits everybody, but you really concentrate the winners, but you then socialize the losers, as we saw after GFC, you get populism.
I feel like we don't fully appreciate how good global free trade has been. And I think then we're going to realize what we've lost in the next year. Sometimes it's as simple as you're not going to be able to get a peach anytime you want it, right? You're not going to be able to get certain fruit and vegetables anytime you want it. And, when we were kids, there were certain things you just didn't get certain times a year at the grocery store because there's no way
that time of year.
Right. There was no way they could get it there. With global free trade and with the speed of travel and all of those things, we don't realize how lucky we've gotten it. It's sort of like, I feel this way about the vaccine movement, the anti-vax movement, which is we've lost the people that there's a lost memory of what quarantines were like. My dad would tell me stories. He was one of these kids that got everything, the measles and the mumps. So his house they were always quarantined. And like, that was that happened in communities all over so it is also why there was such a 80-20, and why I still think it's an 80-20 issue on vax, but it is our long-term memory. We forget what we didn't have. And, I hate sounding like the old man, you don't realize how good you have it now, but I really think when it comes to access to just whether it's fruits and vegetables or cheap technology, that's what we've gotten. And
we don't fully appreciate it, or we didn't fully understand why it was cheap. I think that's a riddle that I haven't solved.
Well, here's a door number 3 for you, because I agree with you. The benefits for consumers and producers of free trade, the benefits of vaccines are overwhelming and obvious. At the same time, I do tend to think that we tend to also oversell virtues and underappreciate sort of the frictions or the externalities of things. So free trade is great, but if you and I were from a town where the factory got moved to China or Mexico and nothing got moved in but a dollar store and fentanyl, we wouldn't, and then the problem would happen, Chuck, and you and I know this. We know these people, they were always dying to get on your show, is they'd come on and they would cite some AEI study that is substantively correct about how the GDP grows. But at the macro level, we're seeing a lot of winning. At the micro level, there's a lot of losing, and people ignored those folks and told them they just didn't understand economics. Even on, I'm hesitant on vaccine because I tend to think, vaccines are so overwhelmingly powerful, but in a lot of ways, read Marty Makary, the new head of the FDA's book called Blind Spots. It's a wonderful book, a year or two ago. He's not a MAGA head. He's a legit doctor, but he points out that the health establishment routinely will oversell. Like, for example, the way to avoid allergies is total abstinence from peanuts. We did that, the UK did that, and here you need an EpiPen, and the rest of the world you don't. Why? Because that was the exact wrong advice. We overprescribed antibiotics. A whole generation of women got screwed out of really important hormone replacement therapy because of one wrong, or overread study. But what happens is, if you question, hey, are we sure? We saw that with the pandemic. Are we sure there aren't a lot of false positives? Maybe it's not as deadly as some of the people in the news are saying. Those people suddenly were told, well, you don't believe in science. And we so vilify our opponents who often are asking very important and very legitimate questions. And we so want things to be 100% right that we've lost a tolerance and a space for the fact that things can be overwhelmingly good, but not universally good. And if we don't deal with the things that aren't great about it, we're going to grow those who are skeptical of us and of our institutions.
What do you make that nobody's gotten this right? It's not just our country. There's a lot of successful Western countries that have just not gotten this right, either not able to help those that have been displaced. Like, nobody seems to have gotten this right.
Well, you mean trade?
Let's start with trade.
So there again, it's nobody's got it perfect. I think, look at Singapore. That's a tiny little island with no natural resources.
Islands are different to me. Island mentalities, like, Australia and New Zealand. I mean, when you're in Singapore, whether it's big island or small island, I don't know. The island mentality, you don't live on an island if you're not willing to. People that live on some sort of island nation understand that they're kind of in this together. That's always been my sense, that there's a slight difference. But anyway, I don't mean to pour cold water.
I'm not sure I'm going to agree totally. My mind's starting to go to, like, how about Japan? And, how about Crete? And I don't know enough about it.
I don't know. How big of a country do you get before it's not an island mentality, which would be Australia, for instance. But anyway, geographically meaning. But anyway, go ahead.
So I guess nobody's gotten it perfect. Overall, I mean, here's kind of a thought experiment. Go find anybody who hates trade or whatever and say, if I'm going to have you're going to be reborn 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I'm not going to tell you whether you're a man or woman, what race or whatever. I can't think of anybody on the planet who wouldn't want to be reborn today. I'd like to think that everybody would like to be start again right here in the United States. I do worry sometimes, Chuck, that while 50 years ago, I think anybody on the planet would say, well, I would love to be there. Some of our internal divisions, some of the nastiness, some of our inability to get out of our own way to try to find the common ground that is required under the Constitution created by the founders to solve problems. It's feeling a little frustrating, but then again, go back to read history. It's recency bias, Chuck. But you want to live in the 70s? Knock yourself out, buddy. You think it was better then? No way. The economy was rougher then. We were going through stagflation. God willing, we're not about to go through that again. You had
that looks a little troublesome, but anyway.
well, let's keep our fingers crossed on that one. But the threat of nuclear war with the Soviet Union, the murder of George Floyd was scary. Read about the murder of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam's more divisive than anything we're dealing with today. And even for gay and lesbian Americans, the anti-trans stuff I find nasty and I find just unnecessarily harsh and cruel. But 50 years ago, we were debating the right to marry someone you love. There were some states that made it illegal to be gay or lesbian. And thank God we're only debating now who gets to play in which sports and use which bathrooms. And it's, it's not where I want it to be and it's not where you want it to be, but it's a lot better than where it was.
Let's talk about sort of a few things because you're really good. I have a sense that you're going to be how soon before I get one of your risk, the 6 charts on the various risks that are out there? Because I feel like we're getting close to that. And so let's talk about recession risks. It feels like there's a lot of flashing yellow lights. I'm not going to say there's a flashing red light anywhere yet, but there's a lot of flashing yellow lights. Turns out, for instance, let's talk about this the correction of the jobs numbers. First, it turns out the vibes were more accurate than the data in 2024. And this is a sense, always trust the public. The perception of the economy is what the economy is, because perception, especially in the economy, is reality.
Well, that's the wisdom of the crowd. Ultimately, I mean, the market is the ultimate weighing in of everything and everyone, and the hype cycle people and the people who are just looking for good copy and all get ultimately blended into the giant blender that is the market. You mentioned when am I going to do one on risks? I actually have my list. And maybe 2 weeks ago, and I found it such a doomer read that I threw it aside, and I decided, because it was towards the end of the August recess, and I instead just wanted to do one on sort of, I called it no regrets, but what are things people regret? Because if you know what you're going to regret,
I like your no regrets one, right? Yeah, that whole by age, like it goes. You quoted Charlie Munger, who said, I want to know where I'm going to die so I can avoid the location or whatever. Yeah.
So in that regard, if you know what you're going to regret 20 years from now, we'll start doing the things so that you don't end up in the position where you have to regret it. On the economy, it's a great question. I've successfully called 10 of the last 2 recessions. I definitely don't know. I have had success investing every month into a index fund, a well-diversified S&P 500 index fund, and doing it every single month since I got married. So that's a long time. Every other investment has not been as successful as that. Sometimes I guess right, sometimes I guess wrong, but it's really hard to know. You could see a scenario where the tariffs are slowing things down and the immigration is driving up prices, and boy, there's plenty of folks, whether they're rooting against the president or they're always rooting against a president. There's just a lot of, I read a great sociological study. People who propose doom are seen as smarter and more likely to be read than people who are kind of more calm and
whether the facts back them up or not.
It's right. And the evolution type people say, well, that the evolutionary thinker people, by the way, I believe in evolution. For the people who point to evolutionary theories, say humans are wired to look for danger because if you don't pay attention, the lion eats you. Right. And you're less likely to react as viscerally to something that doesn't seem threatening. And so, as you know, in the media business, you need people to watch, you need people to listen, you need people to click. And if you give them kind of, hey, things are probably fine, well, I'm not going to read that story. Right. If here are 3 things you need to do before the next stagflation, you're totally going to click on that because it's a risk.
Yeah, no, another plane lands safely at National News at 11. Right. It's not something that's ever in the that's ever in the promo. But look, you are looking at this for a living. I mean, it does feel as if, well, here's the ultimate uncertainty. What are the future of the tariffs? I assume that if he loses in court, a Republican Congress gives him the whatever if he does lose at the Supreme Court, Roberts' rationale is going to be that Congress has to do this, which means if Congress essentially gives him the authority to do this, then he can sort of keep these in place. Is that the most likely way where we're headed in your mind? Assuming the Supreme Court upholds all these other lower court ruling on the legality of the tariffs?
Well, I think it's even easier than that, Chuck. There's lots. IEPA was never used for tariffs before. Mm-hmm. Congress has for decades and decades been passing legislation giving tariff and trade regulatory authorities to the executive branch. There's Section 232. There's Section 301. Those are the ones Trump used in his first term. There's Section 122 and 338 and 201. It's all there. What he loved about IEPA was it didn't require doing work. It didn't require a process. You could just say, I hereby claim there's an emergency, and here's what we're going to do in response to it. So my macro takeaway is there will be tariffs. Whether Congress does anything or not doesn't matter. The president has all the tools, and he's got all the conviction. Tariffs are his Ginsu knife. They are the solution to every problem. Mm-hmm. If you want to raise revenue because deficits are high, tariffs raise revenue. If you want to reindustrialize manufacturing because we're overdependent on Chinese manufacturing, that's what he says tariffs will do. They're getting they're getting investment in the Midwest. They're helping. They got Mexico to get some religion on fentanyl to some degree and on the southern border to a significant degree. Brazil's prosecuting his boy Bolsonaro, and he's like, we're going to hit those guys with tariffs. He threatened Putin with more tariffs, and India for that matter too, vis-a-vis purchases of secondary oil, but he hasn't ultimately pulled the trigger on that. He's got all the authorities he needs, and regardless of what the Supreme Court says about this one statute he's been using, he'll just pivot and he'll shift. If he's got to cough some money up.
What you're saying is there are other ways he can essentially pull a lever and essentially then, okay, now sue me over using this emergency act, essentially.
Well, yeah, but he doesn't. There are several trade statutes where the lawsuits have happened. They just require the executive branch to do a little bit more work in advance. Trump liked the fact that by the end of Q1, he could, Liberation Day everywhere. He thought it was a shortcut, and it's, we'll see what the Supreme Court says. Remember too, Chuck, President Biden was going to relieve $500 billion of student debt based upon some emergency powers relating to COVID. Now,
the court said no.
Well, you got to take your mind all the way back. This is ancient history when Republicans believed that the power of the purse resided with Congress. So last year, and Biden, he said, you don't think I can do it? Sue me. They sued him. He lost. Biden didn't have the power to do it. But after that day, he still forgave $184 billion of student debt. How? Other laws. Piecemeal here and there. He couldn't do the one big, massive debt relief that he had structured. I think when Trump loses in court, if he loses because he was trying to use a law from 1798, he'll just use a different law. His team will continue to flex and pivot. The one where I see least ability to move is impoundment, and maybe these pocket rescissions that I think they have been launched that could lead to a shutdown. I'm assuming that law is so black and white that they're going to say the administration can't refuse to spend because the law that says a president's not allowed to refuse to spend. And I don't know of a different law that they can use to impound.
I can't remember the last time we had a Democratic minority sort of leaning into the idea of forcing a shutdown. Can you?
Well, I mean, so there was a shutdown, recall, at after the midterms in 2018. Trump was president.
But he was fighting with his own party over it. It was his own party. It wasn't the Democrats.
He was, but the Dems were certainly, and they shouldn't have been, but they weren't there looking to bail him out.
No, I mean, obviously with both, but that was one that he couldn't agree with his own party.
Well, so what's fascinating to me on this one is Dems first believe in government. Dems don't want the government to be shut down. They're unhappy that they cut a deal with the Republicans, and then through impoundment, the administration says, yeah, we're not going to follow that deal. So if I'm a Democrat, why would I ever cut a deal?
I don't see any incentive for them to cut a deal with these guys, because of rescissions.
Well, but here's the question. So if you don't cut a deal and they don't do a CR, so you don't continue as spending as is,
right?
And Trump says, we've decided these are the non-essential workers, and to the non-essential workers, let me say, here's what we suggest: find a new job. The taxpayers shouldn't be paying people who are doing non-essential work. Government should be a business of essentialism, and that's it. So if you don't do something essential, go find a job somewhere else that's essential to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then Trump will say, and we're going to pay essential workers. We're going to pay the military. We're going to pay ICE. You might say, well, you're not allowed to pay them. And that's the reason you're not allowed to pay them is because in 1980, Jimmy Carter's Attorney General, Ben Civiletti, said if you pay anyone during a shutdown, that would violate the Anti-Impoundment Act. Well, we know what the administration thinks of the Anti-Impoundment Act. So I think there's a little bit of a worry that if you're the Dems and you stand up, it's Doge 2.0. They're like, great. We don't need to ever reopen fill in the blank HUD or Department of Education. That's their worry.
I get it. I know that was the worry in March. I wonder if that is as big of a worry this time, because they've just been so routed, if you will, on so many, look at the redistricting, look at, on some of these other things with ICE. I mean, I don't, and do I think there are 7 senators who will not want to do this? I do. Eventually, they may have the stomach for it for a week or two, but they won't have the stomach for it for more than that.
Yeah, look, as always, I mean, what it would take is it'll take some small number of Republicans, and frankly, you and I could identify them who would agree with the Democrats to cut a deal of no pocket rescissions. Yep. That's thin gruel, but that would be enough. And
I think that and the Obamacare subsidies, which a bunch of Republicans secretly really actually want back now after the Medicaid. I mean, the one big beautiful bill's already done some damage. They don't want a second punch in the gut.
Fabrizio says that's the single biggest risk, as you know, to Republicans holding the House. So there's a deal to be had, but the administration has to give permission. Otherwise, how do we get it voted on? That's one reform, by the way, I'd love to have. I don't know that it's necessarily an internet era reform needed, that the need for it is occasioned by the existence of the internet, like some other things I was talking about. But in my opinion, things ought to get votes. That you ought to be something that has the potential to get a majority vote ought to have an up or down. Let's have a democratic process. If you're allowed to vote no, but to not have to vote on something that, particularly if it's past the other chamber, for example, they ought to be required to vote on it.
No, I mean, this is what drives me crazy on tariffs. I want to see everybody. I want everybody on the record. You're going to raise taxes on every consumer good we import into this country. I want to see you vote on the record on this.
What's funny about that, Chuck, though, is the reason past Congresses gave this authority to the administration.
We know why they did. Yeah, go ahead.
Is to cut tariffs. Because, there's so many narrower constituencies that a lot of these guys would kind of hope yes on a trade deal, but vote no.
No, this was the joke, that the idea was, well, we gave it to the president because we figured the freest trader among all 3 branches of government would be the office of the presidency. Oops.
Well, that was true until it wasn't.
Right. Let's do, you're so good at unintended consequences. This raid of the factory in Georgia with the South Korean workers. And this feels like a something that, let's just say, an action happened before there was any thought behind it. This feels like this is going to do, we already have a South Korean government that's a mess right now. They have their own internal issues. Speaking of instability in Western democracies, South Korea is right there with Japan, the UK, France. All these countries that are suffering right now with sort of a form of polarization that we have. But what's the unintended consequence of that? Because I look at this, here's the president going around begging for foreign companies to bring their manufacturing into the United States, and he'll lighten up on some of the tariffs. He'll lighten up on some of those things. And here Hyundai's doing that. And now you may get a rise of anti-Americanism in South Korea that could really harm us in ways we haven't fully appreciated.
Yeah, look, what I think Vice President Vance would say is that, it's not complicated. They want big investments in the United States where American workers are running the factory, are manning the machines. And that's, you don't have a lot of Americans working the machines in Seoul or in other countries around the world. That's their theory of the case.
Right.
But everything's a trade-off, to your point. The Substack I did this past weekend was taking a look at housing and construction.
Yeah.
And, if the Secretary Besson said they may declare a housing emergency. Well, what could they do? Well, if you really want to have more housing built, you could lower the tariffs on things you're importing, which are making it more expensive to build homes. You could narrow your immigration enforcement because the construction workforce is very significantly non-U.S. born, and you're driving up labor prices and you're making labor more scarce. But there also was a desire to secure the southern border, which they did, and now there's a desire, because he campaigned on this, to have some amount of the millions of people who came here inconsistent with laws be sent back somewhere. But what I keep thinking about when I look at the president is the why versus the how. There's a lot of support for a lot of why Trump's doing things, but not
I've
how.
always said that. And this is the danger the Democrats have. They see the unpopularity of sending the National Guard into the cities and say, aha, we can fight them on this. And it's like, no. The tactics they don't like. The end goal they still want.
No, you're 100% right. On trade, majorities say that we shouldn't be running such massive trade deficits every year, but tariffs are a majority unpopular. You see the same thing in crime. You see the same thing with deportation of undocumented people. You see the same thing with a lot of the political correctness.
Well, right, like you quoted last week. I think it was in your last Substack, where you want deep dark at parties that you don't want me at. With the whole Jack Nicholson point. You want me on that wall. You may sneer at me. You may not like, this or that. I'm totally mangling it because I haven't rewatched that movie in a long time, because I don't stumble upon movies anymore in our era of streaming. But sorry, that's a rant. Like, that's the one thing I miss, right? Watching pieces of movies like in the old days. I think our friend Bill Simmons, the entire rewatchable, so it's probably going to have to become the rebingeables, because nobody watches pieces of movies anymore because of how we consume content. But Nicholson was that person, right? Nicholson is I don't want to know the tactics you're doing, and if I do, I will condemn them. But please keep the streets clean.
Right. And you absolutely have that. You're right. I did include that. And it was in a reference to Canada, which was kind of funny, because I ended up getting about 4 or 5 emails from Canadian readers, who didn't appreciate.
Poor Canadians.
So the point I made, both when I was up there at a speaking thing where I was the only American, and man, did they come after me. But I said, look, if you're Donald Trump, again, the how, 51st state, and just kind of offensive to one of our great allies and neighbors and friends up north. But if you're Team Trump, you're like, okay, fine. But you know what we got? We got a guy who said he was going to massively increase Canada's defense spending, which we've been begging him to do for years and years and years. Now, all of a sudden, mad at me, they're going to do it. They ended their carbon tax. They're going to reduce their immigration, and they're going to, quote, build, baby, build, according to Carney. So if you're the president, you're President Trump, maybe they're not going to put you on a Canadian postage stamp. Right. But the why, all of these things they weren't doing, could there be a kinder and gentler and less jerky way to do it? I think so, and you think so. But the administration would say, every president prior to Trump was begging our NATO allies to meet their 2% commitment to defense. Trump comes in, makes them question whether we're still committed to NATO, and now they're all going to 5% with a big assist to Vladimir Putin.
Let's go to the crime way, because I find it interesting. We have Wes Moore and J.B. Pritzker, who are handling this completely differently. J.B. Pritzker is touring Chicago, touting how safe it is. Wes Moore is saying, stay out of Baltimore. We're making progress, and I'm going to surge my own resources into the city to help them out. But you stay out, federal government. Which one is building the better profile for 2028?
Well, I'd say Muriel Bowser, but the mayor of D.C. who says, "Great
Well,
feds, you want to
she's
help."
trapped.
You
Yeah,
wanna-
I've
yeah,
always,
she-
yeah, she's got
she-
handcuffs on her, literally. And I'm not literally, but
well, let's hope not.
sorry, policy handcuffs on her a little bit. But.
Look, it's Moore is a fascinating guy. I'm hoping, as a Marylander, I'm hoping he's wildly successful as governor, because that's good for those of us who live here in the old Bay State. And he's, having met him a few times, he's a charismatic, interesting guy. If Pritzker, a billionaire, although he's getting in shape, if you notice, he's a big, heavy set fellow, and he's slimming down, which is what folks who want to run for president do, and it's also a way to be healthy, which is good.
Right.
The idea that Dems are going to pick even a progressive billionaire just feels so. I don't see how you make it through the primaries. He's obviously very smart. He's saying stay out of my state, but over the Labor Day weekend, there were 57 shootings and 30 deaths, and Chicago's tough. I'm not sure, to your point you made a moment ago, I'm not sure I see a Democratic governor or mayor right now that I think has cracked the code on how to play Trump on crime, because too many Democrats are saying, look at the statistics, but crime is a visceral, emotional issue. We're all afraid of it.
Just like the economy. It is a vibe. Vibes do matter, because the perception is the reality. As far, if people think a city's unsafe, they're not going to travel into that city. Hard stop. And look, is it true that I think some of the caricatures have gone haywire? I mean, I know this firsthand. I had a friend visit recently and expected mayhem, and then came to go see Springsteen. Okay, it was at Nationals Park, so this was probably 6 months ago. I want to say it's 6 or 8 months ago, and oh my God, everything I thought it was good. Everything was great. The city was great, et cetera, et cetera. But that perception can turn into reality, because it does drive people away.
And there is the perception reality and reality. Whether it's carjacking or otherwise, DC is not. You and I know, go to some number of European or other cities. American cities feel a lot less safe, a lot less often. The idea that the nation's capital, is a place you need to watch yourself. You need to be really careful. A single event is an anecdote as opposed to the data. Right. But my daughter's boyfriend, who just graduated and moved here to town 2 days before Trump announces the federal moving in, 10 a.m., 3 blocks from the U.S. Capitol, car rolls up, dude pulls a gun, just takes his wallet, and people worry about crime, and you desperately don't want to be in making crime political. But if you're in a political fight over crime, you don't want to be on the side of crime's not a problem, because it's hard to win that one.
You and I saw a Democratic Party in the 90s respond to, I remember 3 strikes and you're out. Got a lot of Republican governors elected and reelected in 1994. Pete Wilson in California, a Republican governor. Jim Edgar in Illinois, a Republican governor. George Pataki in New York, a Republican governor. And how did the Democrats respond in 95 and 96? The infamous crime bill, with a Republican Congress and a guy named Joe Biden as the face of it in the Senate, hiring 100,000 more cops. I don't see that Democratic Party right now.
Look, it's not your father's Democratic Party, or the one that you and I, came to town and started dealing with. I'm sure you saw yesterday the new Gallup data.
Yeah.
Where
about socialism.
Yeah, where a majority, Republican support for capitalism between 2010 and 2025 went up 3 points to 74%, but it's less than half of the Democrats right now support it, as it keeps falling. And support for socialism is near 50% among Democrats. So you take that issue, you take the crime issue. Again, I'd say it's a combination of the Trump effect pushed Dems left, but post GFC, you have a huge part of the liberal party that says, hey, we're not being listened to. That Hillary's given these speeches to Goldman Sachs for a lot of money, and let's go vote for this Trump guy. Bernie is the populism, now AOC, the populism on the left, just like Trump is the populism on the right. And both establishment parties are struggling. The Dems are in an epic civil war right now. Who's going to be their standard bearer, and where are they going to go? I know you and Saliza on your wonderful, I don't know if it's weekly talks together, have talked some about this. I found, by the way, Chuck, one of my secrets now I've decided for my Substack is, since I'm never going to be as visible or as smart as you sort of guys, but I can be first. So I did my look at 2028 field like 3 months ago. I'm like, I'll just hit stuff before everybody else does, because if I go after you, I'm never going to be as good.
Oh, you're funny on that. Speaking of 2028, I actually want to jump to 2032 because it's a piece of but it gets at to why I do it as a roundabout way to say the two most important states, I think, now for the next decade are Georgia and North Carolina. And let me lay out the case as to why. That what Florida and Ohio were in the first decade, what Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania have been for basically the last 10 years, that now it's going to be Georgia and North Carolina. And let me explain. By 2032, if the current estimates hold on reapportionment, Kamala Harris, believe it or not, in 2024, had she only won of the swing states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, she'd have gotten to right at 270. In 2032, that same map leaves her 11 electoral votes short. She'd be sitting at 259, which means a Sunbelt state, Arizona, Georgia, or North Carolina. And that they are really the new. So you probably have to throw Arizona in there. Those three states now, the Big Ten is out, right? And the ACC, SEC, Big 12 states, since there's no Big Ten yet in the South, there will be, I'm guessing, but there isn't yet of those states, that they are super important. And when you start to do the Democratic math on Senate seats right now, if the Democrats win every Senate seat in every consistent blue state plus the 7 swing states, the ceiling for a Democratic Senate is 52 seats. 52 max. Republicans are at 53 right now, in case you're wondering, and they're underperforming in the swing states, and they've underperformed in a few of their own states. So their ceiling is already higher. But that means holding Georgia Senate and winning North Carolina Senate. And then, of course, those states have to become, if they don't win them, they won't win the presidency. Who wins Georgia, North Carolina will decide who wins the presidency. And I think that is in the 2030s, and frankly, we're getting a taste of it now, that those are probably the two most important states for the next decade. Thoughts?
I agree with you. I wouldn't disagree with you, first, because this is literally what you cut your teeth knowing, learning, and studying.
Well, it's more of me just trying to get you to. I know it makes your brain stir too when you start thinking about these things.
No, I think you're right. Is it David Brooks, or is it maybe Ron Brownstein, who's been talking about the Sun Belt, Rust Belt transition for a while?
Right.
I think you're 100% right. And that is not based upon tariffs or the economy or anything else. Right. It's where people are choosing to live, where the economy is stronger and where the economy is weaker. And all those indications you're right.
Well, and it ties into the socialism issue in this way. Go look at that Gallup poll and go look at where socialism is sort of most popular and where socialism is least popular. And this is where I think the Bernie Sanders crowd and the AOC and the Mamdanis just don't understand the country. If you're in the North, and this includes your Wisconsins, your Michigans, this is why progressives can win statewide, a Fetterman, they can win statewide in the North, is when you say socialism, they think the European socialism. When you go to the Sun Belt, the influx of Latino voters over multiple generations now, it is created, and I say this as a South Floridian, somebody grew up in Miami who understands the S word. And the S word is synonymous with authoritarianism to a lot of Latinos in the South. And it's not just Cubans. It's not just Venezuelans. It is all over Latin America. Even when you see, trust me, I have a lot of Mexican friends who don't like AMLO or Scheinbaum and the hard turn to the left, because they view that as sort of following this path in Latin America where socialism and authoritarianism blur. In the same way, frankly, that populism blurs with a version of authoritarianism in Europe and in Eastern Europe, and we've seen that. But I look at it, it to me makes it, and I don't think the Democrats fully understand this yet, because most of their progressive activists are from the North and therefore don't fully appreciate how toxic the S word is.
Yeah, I haven't seen the Gallup or others break it down. My instinct would be it's certainly in cities and among younger people. There's a higher embrace of the idea. You're right. Rather than some heavy ideological thing, more of an idea that there ought to be stronger safety nets. Whether it's
and the individual ideas do poll well.
Right.
Like but maybe at a minimum, they could still pursue some of these ideas, but they need to radically fight the idea that it's socialism. And in fact, just say, no. Investing in Intel is socialism.
Well,
that sort of mindset.
I think that's smart politics, but I totally agree. I tend to think socialism is an unrehabilitatable brand in an American election.
Right. And I don't think that everybody in the Democratic movement sees that yet.
If you're AOC, you're raising the most money. You have incredibly huge, adoring crowds everywhere you go. All of your actual experience is you're tapping into something that's real and that's meaningful. Yeah. The challenge for the Democratic Party writ large is that can't be the entirety of the party. And if you have a candidate as weak as Biden proved to be, then you have to pander in a way where a great Bill Clinton type candidate or even a Barack Obama figures out, here's how we're going to win. And I'm going to channel. I know you want me to go more left and I know you want me to go more right, but I'm going to put it all together. And I think part of the problem with Biden is rather than being a strong candidate, he was more like the U.S. under the, America under the Confederation, where it was just the states were strong and the leadership was weak and you can't win nationally.
Let me get you out of here on this. The redistricting wars. If we have more competitive Senate seats than House seats, what does that mean?
Well, the first thing you could argue it means is that the politicians, the Republicans in Texas were so pathetic when they did the redistricting in 2021. They could have done this. The reason they didn't is because guys didn't want to have a +8 Republican seat because that'd be a lot more work than a +20 Republican seat. And so in some ways, this is only a problem because incumbents had decided to keep it simple. Ironically, Chuck, and I put this in one of my AI ones, if you put AI in terms, you'd think, well, AI drawing seats, I mean, it can come up with the most perfect
whatever you tell it to do. Yeah, you can get it to make any
because they can carve them, they can test everything and they can carve but if you told an AI maximize the number of seats that Republicans could win, you also increase the number of seats Democrats could win. You make for more competitive seats. What humans do is say, I want a seat that I can't lose. And so as a result, you end up drawing, well, the Dems will get these seats and we'll get these seats. So first, there is an irony that some of the redistricting wars are just that people were too self-dealing and didn't prioritize the party. And now Trump's coming and smacking everybody in the head saying, screw your seat. I care about my presidency. So go back and do what you should do if you're thinking about me. But it's unhealthy that we're now in this environment where if you're in a red state, they carve out all the blues so that you may be 45% of the electorate, you're going to get 10% of the seats. And I'm in Maryland, and I don't know, what are we, 40%, 35% of the voters?
Probably 42, 43,
and we're going to get maybe blanked or maybe get one seat. That just doesn't feel like a representative democracy to me. Of course, if you wanted to fix this, to me, one of the first things you do is you'd say, how many seats are there in the House? 435.
Not enough.
How long's that been true? Since 1911, when they passed the law. What'd they do from the founding of the Republic till 1911? They grew the House as the population grew so that it could be an actually representative body. They stopped doing that, and now you make it much easier to do these ridiculous gerrymanders where people get screwed.
I bet you didn't know this, but you're echoing. I did a TED Talk on Uncap the House. If you want
Wow.
to solve so many problems, it's now live on the TED Talk machine. But this would fix those that don't like, it would, if you increase the size of the House, you increase the electoral college numbers, which means you minimize the split decision of popular vote and electoral college. You end up perhaps making redistricting, gerrymandering less relevant. Not to say it won't happen, but sort of less relevant if you did this. And oh my word, we might diversify the types of people that because you would, in theory, shrink the physical size of congressional districts, which would open it up to people without big dollars to go run for it.
It's consistent with what the founders had designed. You're
Exactly
100% right.
No, and my fear is we're literally flipping it, where the people's house is now the Senate, and the body that is controlled by state legislatures, which originally was elected the Senate, is now essentially electing the House.
I look forward to listening to the TED Talk.
Hey, Bruce Mehlman, this was always a pleasure. I went over an hour. I didn't mean to, so my apologies.
I appreciate the invitation always, Chuck. Good to see you.